Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. And today's comic is Luke Cage, Power Man, issue number 29, dated February 1976. And this issue is okay. This is one of the dreaded fill-in issues, and they actually do inform the reader, because apparently this fill-in was published in the middle of a concurring story arc. And it looks like they were having some deadline issues, and Marvel was having a lot of deadline issues in the late 70s before kind of Jim Shooter came in and righted that ship. But nevertheless, they were forced to publish a fill-in issue here, because the thing is, if they actually do miss a publication date, the printing companies would fine them heavily. So the thing is that from a financial point of view, they were forced to produce an issue number 29 at this time frame. It's a kind of a done in one. This was done by Marvel's fill-in expert or top guy, Bill Mantlo at the time. Bill Mantlo, I think he had just broke into comics a few years earlier, and he started writing scripts for them. And he was known as basically their fill-in guy. So he would write these done-in-one stories for all these various comic books, in the idea that if Marvel was in danger of missing a deadline, they could simply kind of just throw this issue in. And to Marvel's credit, the editorial team didn't hide this. They were like, listen, we missed the deadlines here. But don't worry, the story that you guys are really into, we'll get back to it next month. We see Luke Cage here. He's on top of a building here, and he's battling Mr. Fish. And he's telling Luke Cage, you shouldn't make jokes about my looks, Cage. Nobody laughs at Mr. Fish. And he's called the most frightful villain ever, which I would say is kind of overplay here. Although I have to say, if a slimy fish man were grabbing you by the throat, that would be kind of a frightening experience here. The cover kind of looks like it's by Ernie Chan, but that's just me speculating. So I'm going to go into the story. I'm going to talk about some of the creative team, because I actually did meet a couple of these people around this time. The story I mentioned is written by boisterous Bill Mantlo. And Bill Mantlo was someone I actually did meet when I was 9 years old. The story of that is basically I was 9 years old. I was playing in a park nearby, and it turned out that Bill's stepson was also there. So just two kids. We were just kind of goofing around, just talking about comic books, and Bill's son mentioned that, hey, both my parents work for Marvel. And I think I was a little skeptical at first, but he was sort of, no, let me show you, let me prove it to you. And we went back to his parents' apartment, and there I got to meet both Bill and Karen Mantlo. And it was a fun experience. I got to be friends with Adam for a little while. I was a difficult little shit to deal with. So I totally regret the number of friendships that I could have maintained, but I didn't because I was a brat. But nevertheless, Bill and Karen were so gracious to me. And I remember, I did see Bill Mantlo's comic book collection, and it was amazing. He had stacks and stacks of all these Silver Age issues, early issues of Marvel Comics. I specifically remember Avengers #2. All the comics were in pristine condition. None of them were bagged. So they were just left out in the open in stacks. I remember I was not allowed to touch them, and Bill was 100% correct in that. You definitely did not want me, because I wanted to read those comics so badly. Um, I remember that Adam said that his dad was allowed to take home literally as many comics as he wanted. So, like, so the Marvel employees, they all got the comic books for free, which made sense because they had to keep up with what's going on in terms of their continuity. In terms of what happened to Bill, after I think in probably 77, 78, they had moved out of the neighborhood. So everything I know about Bill is sort of in the public record. And he's mentioned as boisterous Bill Mantlo because I guess Bill talked a lot. And I know that he was studying law around the time that he was leaving comics, and this was in the early 90s. But the thing is, Bill also had taken up another hobby at that, well, I shouldn't call going to law school a hobby, but he had taken up rollerblading around this time, and he had gotten into a horrible hit and run where he was rollerblading home, and he was struck by a car that had sped off after hitting him. And he might have been killed on the spot, but instead he had suffered irreversible brain damage. Now, Bill was not wearing his helmet at the time, and apparently he made a conscious decision not to wear it. And he didn't do it out of any political ideology. Like he was this libertarian, he's going to be like, the government's not going to tell me that, I need to wear this safety helmet. He felt that he was a good enough rollerblader that he did not need to wear the helmet. This is apparently what he had told his brother Bill. No, this is apparently what Bill had told his brother. But the thing is that you wear safety equipment not to protect yourself from yourself, but also to protect you from the rest of the world. He had made this, this one questionable judgment call. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him. He might have still ended up in the current state that he's in, but at least with the helmet, he would have had a lot more protection. As I mentioned, Bill did survive, but he had irreversible brain damage. So in some ways, he kind of did die on that day because he was never the same again. And the lettering was done by Karen, his wife, and I had met her too. And what was interesting, both of them were working at home at the time. And I think, if I remember correctly, they had taken the master bedroom and they didn't use it as a master bedroom. And instead, Karen had a large draft board because she was lettering the original art. And sort of that master bedroom was turned into her office. I remember she didn't like when people were looking over her shoulder as she was working. So, because that's what I was doing when I saw her working. But, I complied with their wishes. And, I haven't seen them since the 1970s. Both Bill and his wife are still alive. The art is by George Tuska. It's called Gorgeous George Tuska. Then the inks are by Venturesome Vince Coletta. So for many kids, this is a nightmare lineup because there were a lot of kids who did not like Bill's work. When Bill tended to do fill-in works, they were very Silver Agey. And I can see why maybe some of the kids didn't really like his work because his work tended to be leaned toward the Silver Age type of model rather than the Bronze Age. Although Bill did do Bronze Age work when he was given a title where he was the regular writer. Most of the issues, most of the problems I know that a lot of fans have with Bill's work was with these done-in-one issues. Then, yeah, Marv Wolfman was the editor. It's a decent story overall. There are some bad stereotypes in this story. Basically, that Luke Cage is a terrible businessman. He basically rents his services out as a bodyguard, but then he finds every excuse in the world not to appreciate this job and to actually discourage someone from hiring him. So it kind of falls back on that old stereotype. Oh, do they really want a job? And but nevertheless, and there's a few other things, but I'm going to go into the story. The story is No One Laughs at Mr. Fish. And we see Luke Cage here, kind of looking like he's kind of sashaying a little bit here, as he's thinking about what's going on. He took this job to guard this trucking company, because apparently this trucking company were getting extortion threats, and the trucking association, they're taking these threats seriously because some of their vehicles had been vandalized. And so Luke's here to get to the bottom of that. Luke, he's not enjoying his time here. He's thinking this is really a crummy way to spend a Saturday night. And but he also realizes that he's needed here. That, hey, this is a job that's going to pay the rent, but also that there is shenanigans going on here, and he kind of wants to get to the bottom of it. So anyway, Luke Cage, as he's kind of feeling sorry for himself here, he notices some sounds coming from behind him, and he's going to investigate here. Look, he's drawn actually fairly well here. I think Vince did not do the worst job in the world here in terms of inking. But nevertheless, the thing is, with George Tuska art is, I find that his art works best in stories that I don't really care too much about. If there's a storyline that I was really looking forward to, I kind of would not want George Tuska or Vince Colletta to be handling the art. So anyway, Luke, he's investigating these noises because first he thinks they're shadows, but then he realizes, hold it, they're not shadows here because these are noises I hear. And then it appears that there's a huge explosion. And Luke Cage, he kind of he's just barely out of the way. He sees this huge explosion. He shouts out, "Sweet jumping Christmas." Christmas was his go-to phrase. I never understood that type of slang. I don't know, because I never heard anyone use it other than Luke Cage. Now the thing is that Luke Cage failed in his job. He had one job, was to look over these trucks, and he didn't do it because one of them blew up right in front of him. But then he thinks to himself that, he kind of feels bad for the owner because he let the owner down. But on the other hand, he knows that the truck is insured. So he's not going to be too worried about failing his job here. And he's definitely not going to give any refunds because he's like, hey, listen, I know the insurance company will make you right. The guy's going to say, listen, the insurance company is going to barely give me back 75%. Luke Cage, no. The insurance company is going to take care of it. We're going to end it there. And then Luke has a flashback to why he got hired here. And again, we see the Truckers Association. These are kind of like independent trucking firms. They come together and they form an association. And the thing is, all these truckers they're encountering these problems, and they're saying that there's a criminal element behind it that's attempting to extort them. Luke Cage is hearing this. This should be the type of job that Luke Cage should immediately jump at. This is the type that his business model was made for. But he decides to call out the owners of these trucking firms, saying, "What's the matter with you? You guys don't have any balls? Why don't you take care of it yourself? Rather than bothering me, a guy who's like a hired bodyguard." So right here, Luke is trying to discourage a client from hiring him. The truck owners, they make the point that they actually did try to do that. They tried to stand up to this criminal element, but they know they're outmatched. Apparently, one of the owners got branded with an X, and he's showing this off to Luke Cage. So he's saying, "Listen, dude, we're trying to stand up, for ourselves. We couldn't do it. We're looking to hire you, the guy with the superhero powers, and you're going to stand up for us. Do you kind of get this?" So then Luke, he agrees to the job. He's a little down on himself, saying, "Listen, I was so busy grousing that I didn't notice that this crook got one over me." He's not planning on giving out any refunds, but he does feel bad when he cashes that check. However, it turns out that the criminal didn't get away, and Luke Cage sees his silhouette, the Vince Colletta silhouette, running out of the trucking area here. And Luke notices him. He gives chase to him. He notices that this individual is moving very quickly, and that he's going to really have to step it up to catch up to him. Now, the thing is that the criminal's heading toward a dead end. And Luke Cage is right there at the dead end, but he doesn't see where the criminal went. So he's kind of cursing himself that he had missed this opportunity, but it turns out the criminal was right behind him, and he kind of basically bashes in Luke Cage's head with a metal rod here. I do have to note, though, the coloring. Apparently, there were issues with Luke Cage going to the dentist, because at times his teeth are really yellow, as in, sun bright yellow. But nevertheless, at this point, he's seeing stars, not the sun. He's seeing stars. It looks like the man who got the drop on Luke Cage, he seems stronger than most normal humans, because one, he was really able to kind of like give a really hard shot to Luke Cage here. He's also able to jump over this fence fairly easily. And even the criminal is noting that the blow that he had struck would have killed a normal person, but he just seems a little woozy afterwards. Luke Cage is saying, "Listen, I'm not going to forget your voice, and if I ever see you again," not that I plan on chasing you right now, because my head hurts. But the individual who had attacked Cage is saying, "Won't do you no good, hero man. You ain't never gonna hear of it again." So this is like a villain who's making it clear that he's not going to last stand anything. Luke Cage, he gets a hold of his senses, and he smashes through the fence that the criminal had jumped over. Luke Cage is saying, "Nothing gonna stop me," but then something does stop him. And apparently there's a large pit directly behind the fence. So when Luke Cage smashed the fence, the momentum took him into this pit. So Luke Cage realizes that he was kind of set up, that the villain there was looking to kind of gloat him into a kind of a headlong attack, and then this backfired on Luke Cage. But nevertheless, Luke Cage gets out of the pit. He's still chasing the individual. And then he confronts him directly. And here we get a first look at Mr. Fish. This is the done-in-one villain here. I actually think that Mr. Fish was actually well drawn here. He's drawn very cartoonishly. But nevertheless, I do like the way George Tuska had drawn this character's face. We see some unfortunate stereotypes here. There's this one character who kind of looks like a little person version of an actress who is known as Butterfly McQueen. Butterfly McQueen was a well-known actress in the early 20th century. She was best known for being in Gone in the Wind. She was an African-American actress. She was the one famous for saying, "I don't know nothing about birth and no babies." That was sort of the line that put her in like movie fame. That was her big movie moment. She was really a wonderful person. She fought for civil rights, but she had that very high squeaky voice, and she sort of looked like what racist whites would think of black people. And we see the character here is kind of shown here, a similar character, though a dwarven in size. And she's known as Strike. And she says some really stereotypical black exploitation dialogue. She go back to Mr. Fish. Mr. Fish is basically a fish man here. He is armed though, so he kind of keeps a side piece with him. And he also has some other members here that kind of look like they're from The Wire. And it turns out that this operation is a MAGA operation. So the thing is, MAGA, which is the stand-in for the mafia, Mr. Fish is an associate with one of the families there, and this is sort of his racket of shaking down these trucking firms. And he's already given himself the monker Mr. Fish, because he definitely looks like one here. And Mr. Fish is saying, "Listen, you better not laugh at me. You better not find me, looking like a funny guy. I'm not a funny guy here." So he's doing kind of the Joe Pesci thing from Goodfellas here. Luke Cage is saying, "Listen, there's nothing funny about your looks. I'm trying not to upchuck my last meal." So there's sort of a disconnect here between the two of them. Mr. Fish, he doesn't really like Luke Cage's attitude, and he's going to make his desire known to destroy him. Or he doesn't speak with any quote inner city dialect here. He kind of gives the standard, super villain verbiage, I should say. So then he orders, Mr. Fish orders his minions to shoot Luke Cage here. They both open up, the two henchmen here, they both open up with automatic weapon fire. Because these weapons were supplied by MAGA, they're more powerful than regular firearms. The bullets aren't penetrating Luke Cage's skin because his skin is made out of solid steel, or as strong as solid steel. But nevertheless, they are affecting him. and they drive him to the ground. And Luke Cage is actually in some pain here, but nevertheless, he's going to fight back. So he's fighting back against the henchmen at this point. He's destroying their weapons. In a one-on-one battle, these henchmen are really overmatched here. Then it looks like Curly Neal from the Harlem Globetrotters is one of the henchmen here. He's grabbed. He's starting to sweat. And but Luke Cage is saying, "Listen, you guys mean nothing to me. It's Mr. Fish I want." But then comes Strike. And Strike is a little person who has little fear of Luke Cage here. So she jumps on top of Luke Cage here, and she covers his eyes, so he doesn't know what he's looking at. Meanwhile, she's like punching away. She's saying dialogue like, "That may be Miss Cage, but y'all still gots to go through us first. It's me, Miss Cage, Strike. Just keep y'all busy till the boss gets his stuff together." So this kind of some unfortunate dialogue. Some of the writers at Marvel admitted that most of their ideas about characters and characterization in Luke Cage came from black exploitation films. But turns out Mr. Fish, he's going to get involved here, but he's not actually going to go mano a mano with Luke Cage or mano a fish with Luke Cage. He pulls out a weapon, he starts firing it, and he knocks he knocks Luke Cage out here. So apparently Mr. Fish made sure that he had the most powerful weapon, which is, this is how crime bosses think. And one of the henchmen says, You cooked him, Mr. Fish. Fried him like a flounder." Hey, you know what, Mr. Fish? He might take that comment a different way, and he might end up cooking this guy, but he doesn't. So the thing is that right now they see that Luke Cage is still alive, but he's unconscious, so they don't think he's going to be alive too long. And so Mr. Fish and the henchmen, they work on removing Luke Cage from the census. So because this is a building development here, they're taking him to the top of the building here that hasn't been yet fully been completed yet, I should say. So they're going up about 25 stories up. And at this point, the plan is to simply chuck Luke Cage off the side of the building. And the thing is that it looks like Mr. Fish wants to cut his ties with MAGA too. So he's using this opportunity to kind of brandish his brand. He's going to take credit as the man who got rid of Luke Cage. Then he's going to go to MAGA and tell him, "Listen, you don't tell me my territory. I'll tell you what your territory is." So that's Mr. Fish's game plan at this point. So yeah, he doesn't really have lofty goals here. I mean, honestly, this is the stuff like Tony Soprano would negotiate about. So anyway, the henchmen are noticing that Luke Cage is starting to wake up. And before they throw Luke Cage off the side of the building, the villain, Mr. Fish here, is very insistent that Luke Cage listen to his origin story. So this is the example where the villain sort of rolls out his backstory and what's going on. And the thing is, they're really rough with Luke Cage here in terms of they're really slapping him around. They're making sure he's going to pay attention here. So he's not going to be half listening. And it turns out that Mr. Fish was one time just basically kind of like a regular henchman himself, kind of shaking down these trucking firms. So it turns out that one night they were on the docks and they were going to carry out a robbery. And they knew what they were going to rob and what truck it was in. And although they didn't understand exactly the consequences of pulling this holdup. So what happens is that the henchman here, he sees the driver. The driver is really into this issue of Playboy here. You know, he has a cigar in his mouth. He probably has a cigar in his pants, and and even though it says Playboy from these pictures, it kind of looks like probably something lower rent on the porn mag circuit. So anyway, the driver is brutally murdered here. And then they open up the truck here, and it turns out there's scientific isotopes in there. And the burglar here, he opens one of the boxes up. It's starting to glow at this point. The whole idea of it being radioactive isotopes. So he's trying to carry out the merchandise here, but he's feeling really sick here, because apparently I guess the radioactive emanations from the isotopes are starting to affect this guy, and he's starting to burn up, and it's to the point where he can't stand this rising temperature. So then he dives into the East River, because again the truck was along the docks, and it turned out the other two henchmen, they grab a rowboat and they're looking for their comrade here, and they notice that there's a large amount of bubbles, boiling bubbles in this one particular area. So this is where they're going to look for their friend, or at least their criminal comrade. One of the guys, he sticks his hand into the East River. Would not advise him to do that. East River, 1977. No, you don't want to be anywhere near that water. But it turned out he actually did grab something. And as he's pulling it up, he sees a green scaly hand. And the two henchmen, they see what's happened to their comrade. They kind of see this kind of like creature from the Black Lagoon type of figure here. They immediately get out of the area. It turns out that the man in the water doesn't really understand why they ran off. But once he arrives on the dock, he realizes why those guys ran away, and he knew that basically he was in this new form, and you know, he kind of looks a little like Triton here from the Inhumans. Triton was the guy you didn't want to be if you were an Inhuman. Margaret Sanger, who was a well-known figure in the early 20th century, she said that if you want to change a person, change how they look. And boy, this guy changed as a person. So I'm going to continue with the story, but I'm going to get to the letters. I found the letters somewhat interesting. They reminded me of the letters that I was reading in Ghostwriter number 35, where you had these ultra patient fans saying, after 7 years, I'm finally seeing potential. After 7 years of buying this comic, I'm finally seeing the potential that this character has. And I kept thinking, God damn, these are some patient fans. And these fans are just as patient. Because apparently Luke Cage had gone through a couple of iterations in terms of his character and what's going on. And it looks like fairly recently the fans started to get a little excited about what was going on with this comic. So they also credit Bill Mantlo for really helping, because even though this is a fill-in story he had done earlier, he was still writing a lot of the regular issues of Luke Cage. I think at this time George Perez, who was a rising star at Marvel, he was doing a lot of the penciling. So I think at this time George Perez, they were starting to work George Perez into the A-list titles, but they wanted to see how George would work with the kind of like the lower B titles, like the Inhumans, like Luke Cage. So apparently, according to this one person, Les from the Bronx, they really like what's going on. Apparently, Luke at this time, he was battling two foes. I think one was called Cottonmouth, and the other was called Cockroach Jones. And editorial thanks Les for the kind words. The second writer didn't really care much for issue number 25. Apparently, it was the last issue that Steve Englehart did. I think I got the idea that Steve Englehart really didn't enjoy writing for this title. And he admitted that basically a lot of what he did was based on black exploitation film. I think this writer wants to see a return of Don McGregor. Don McGregor wrote some great Black Panther arcs. So they're thinking that he probably might be able to handle an African American character just as well as he actually dealt with the African character, Black Panther. I don't know whether that came to fruition. Don McGregor, from what I understand, had a bit of a Napoleonic complex, and he was a bit of a troll, so he kind of rubbed a lot of people in Marvel the wrong way. Like, one of the things that he was told when he was writing Black Panther was that, hey, you need to include more white characters, with the thinking being that if the title had more white characters, it might be able to kind of goose up sales. Marvel kind of admitted they had a hard time getting white readers to buy a black title. So when Don McGregor got this edict, he introduced a storyline where the Black Panther was fighting the Ku Klux Klan. And he told management, hey, you wanted more white characters, I'm giving you a lot of them here. And editorials saying, listen, we're sticking with Bill Mantlo, and we think they're great, and there's something wrong with you, Mark. They also mentioned a guy, John Verputten. John Verputten was an interesting guy. He was I think one of Marvel's inkers. And he was a good example of what was known as the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle was something that was theorized by a doctor, Dr. Lawrence Peter, that people will at one point be elevated to their level of incompetency. And what that means is that someone has a job, they do the job well, they will be promoted. And then if they do that job well, they'll be promoted again and again. And at some point, they'll be promoted to a position that they're totally unqualified or incompetent for. This apparently happened with John Verputten, where he was a good inker. Then he was promoted to various editorial staff positions. And I think he made it as far up as production manager. And that's where things kind of fell apart for John. One of the things that John was in charge of, plot ideas were approved and the story had to be produced. He would be the guy who would okay that the work was submitted and then the writer and artist would get paid. But the thing was is that the Marvel writers and artists, they found out that Big John, as he was known, was kind of a soft touch. And the thing was is that John Verputten was giving advances for work that had not been submitted yet. And the thing is, this is financial fraud, and this is serious financial fraud, and this is the type of fraud that honestly would get you a prison term. But the thing was is that John wasn't doing this maliciously. He was just seeing it as a way of helping his friends. You know, a writer would come to him, hey John, listen, I got a great idea, but I actually didn't write the script yet. So can you pay me in advance and say that I gave you this script, even though I hadn't written it yet? But don't worry, I'll bring this script next week. It won't be a problem. And this is the type of thing that John got into big trouble with. And the thing was, he was hiding his financial malfeasance. And eventually it was starting to catch up to him, because Marvel at one point, they did start to audit the books. John Verputten, who had kind of had this house of cards where he was hiding this stuff. Sometimes, for example, if an inker promised to finish a job and he didn't finish it, you know, John Verputten would work hours finishing this other person's work. Then the other person would get the credit for it, would get the money for it. And John did this just to simply make sure the books were balanced. And all this eventually caught up with him. He was kind of a guy who wasn't in good health to begin with. And they suspect that he had a massive heart attack as these financial audits were going to catch up with him. And it created a lot of sadness in the Marvel office, because again, he got into this trouble not because he was a malicious guy, but because he was a nice guy. And they figured that the stress finally caught up to him. And I don't think he had reached 30 at that point. They had pointed out that he also had a lot of bad health habits. But nevertheless, you know, he died for this job. Okay, we're going to take a look at another letter. It's talking about Power Man issue number 27, saying that it was okay. The art was okay, but I want more than just okay. And he's given some suggestions about, you know, where to take the comic. One of the things that Robert here from Michigan wants is a re-change of the comic's name back to Hero for Hire, because he feels that calling it Hero for Hire kind of reflects that, you know, this is a black man just kind of struggling through this economy and just trying to make his way financially with what he has. And he also wants to see a return of Billy Graham. Not the preacher, but the artist. Billy Graham was one of the first African American artists that Marvel had hired. He had worked on those Black Panther issues with Don McGregor. Billy Graham was a pretty good artist. I remember liking the layouts of his work. Sometimes his work was a little cartoonish, but it was intended to be that way. He would actually draw African Americans with African American physical characteristics, which meant that, yeah, the women had booties, and they tended to be a little thicker than what you would normally see in women drawn in Marvel Comics. George Perez did that too. And but nevertheless, you know, Billy Graham was a pretty good artist, and they're saying, hey, why don't you bring him back? I think the problem is that Graham had retired from drawing at this time. I think at one point he was working on being a Hollywood actor, so he was kind of pursuing that dream. So they printed this letter knowing that they would not be able to satisfy this guy. Editorial saying, listen, those little differences that you're having with Luke Cage, don't stop buying this title. You keep buying this title, and eventually there'll be that payoff. So this is one of these very patient Luke Cage fans who is saying, "I'm finally seeing potential in this comic." And here they're talking about the next issue, and it's going to be called "And Over the Years, They Murdered the Stars." And this is the trilogy. This has Piranha Jones. I think I'd named another character, but this has Piranha Jones and Cockroach Hampton. And yeah, those were Luke Cage's foes at the time. You can understand why people were like, I'm still waiting to see that potential. And apparently, there's a character in Luke Cage called D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith was actually a real person. He was the director of a number of silent films, including Birth of a Nation. He was a wildly racist guy, and I think someone thought they were being funny by introducing that name as the name of a character in this book. So, yeah, kind of a cheap little thing to do. And then we see the Marvel value stamp, and it's Captain America. I think this is the cover to issue number 112, which was the reprint issue in between that Steranko run. Steranko was furious about that, but Marvel was like, "Dude, listen. Do you know how much? Do you know how much those fines are if we don't print an issue of Captain America?" Because at the time, Steranko was a little behind in the artwork for the follow up or the conclusion of his arc in Captain America. So then we're going to get back to the story. Mr. Fish just ended telling his origin story. Luke Cage isn't impressed. Mr. Fish has this big build up saying, "I bet you're wondering." And Luke Cage was like, No, I'm not. No, really, seriously, I don't need to hear this. Please throw me off the side of this building so I don't have to listen to your origin story again. And this pisses off Mr. Fish. He tells his minions to grab Luke Cage. Luke Cage is tied up at this point, and then he's thrown off this 25-story building, which Luke Cage wanted them to do because he wanted to break out of his bonds, and he does so in mid-flight. But the problem is that he's still falling, and fall from this height is still going to affect him in an adverse way. So he needs to grab this beam, this girder that's sticking out here, or otherwise he's going to end up being smashed on the cement. Luke Cage, he's able to grab the girder, so he's able to stop his fall. He's hanging on to the girder, for dear life, because he doesn't want to fall. But at the same time, as powerful as he is, he actually does strain his left shoulder. So they're making it clear that Luke Cage is going to be fighting this opponent, I should say, at a disadvantage. Because this is one of these things where Luke Cage should really just overpower this guy really easily. So anyway, the Mr. Fish's henchmen, they do see this. So they know what floor Luke Cage is on. They know what side of the building he's on, and they go down to greet him so Luke Cage can fall the rest of the stories down. At this point, Luke Cage he's already gotten out of that predicament, so he's ready to battle Mr. Fish's henchmen. The problem is that Luke Cage is still injured. So it does kind of even the odds a bit for the henchmen. However, Luke Cage doesn't really have much of a problem. One of the henchmen comes forward, and Luke Cage ducks, and he smashes his head against one of these girders here. So he's knocked unconscious. Then Luke Cage uses his fist of steel, and he knocks the other henchmen unconscious. The ones who haven't been belted, they run off because they realize they're overmatched. However, Mr. Fish is not one to give up so easily, so he fires again at Luke Cage here. And the gun that he has is pretty powerful, so it does give him pause, and also his left shoulder is still injured. So Luke here is fighting at a disadvantage here. Um, Luke Cage grabs a hold of the gun. He's able to smash it in two. So Mr. Fish at this point doesn't have his powerful weapon available to him, and Luke Cage is kind of pressing. He's pressing forward. He's giving him the left and the right, and he's really kind of belting Mr. Fish here. But Mr. Fish says, "Listen, I may be down, but I'm not out." And hey, listen, I got some extra powers here myself, and I've been practicing them. So Mr. Fish, he goes forward and he starts to tackle Luke Cage here, and he knocks him off balance. Luke Cage is on his knees at this point. He's at the edge of the roof here. So the thing is, he still has quite a few. It's still quite a long fall here for Luke Cage. Should he be, pushed toward the edge? And even Luke Cage is saying to himself, "He's pushing me toward the edge. Gotta stop him." I think at this point he's kind of channeling Grandmaster Flash here.
Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge.
So then Luke kind of fights back. He hits Mr. Fish with a right uppercut. He's continuing to go on the offense with Mr. Fish, and he's also pointing out that Mr. Fish kind of has low level ambitions in terms of the criminal world. He just wanted to break free from MAGA and kind of run his own racket of extorting trucks and stuff like that. But even though Luke is kind of making fun of Mr. Fish is not ready to give up yet. He grabs a steel girder and he swipes at Luke Cage's bad left shoulder here. So Luke Cage is undergoing a wave of pain here. Mr. Fish, he's continuing with the offense. He's gonna barrel straight ahead with this girder. So he's gonna knock into Luke Cage and then knock him off the side of the building. However, Luke Cage, he pulls a judo move here, and it turns out he flips Mr. Fish off the side of the building. Mr. Fish and the girder, they fall to the ground. Luke Cage here, he acknowledges that his foe is finished. He says, "Goodbye, Mr. Fish. Crummy way to go, man." And then kind of Luke Cage starts feeling sorry for himself here. "I mean, you just spent one whole Saturday night surrounded by killers, corruptions, and freaks. But what was it all for, Cage? A paycheck for a job that you accepted?" So Luke is kind of thinking out loud here, because as I mentioned, the heroes think out loud. It's the villains who talk to themselves. So Luke's thinking out loud, saying, "Hey, is it worth doing this? Is this gig really worth it? Maybe I should look into another occupation. That might not work. Hey, James Evans from Good Times, he had a hard time finding a job." So honestly, Luke Cage shouldn't be complaining here. And as Luke is going through this existential crisis, we see Mr. Fish. He's underneath the girder. He's clearly done with at this point. And so it's just really a matter of who's going to consume the body. You figure this is a building site. There's probably a lot of rats around. There sadly were a lot of stray animals around. I remember growing up in New York around this time, and it was heartbreaking. The number of stray animals that were just walking in the streets. But apparently, if they came across Mr. Fish, at least the cats would have had a good meal. And here it ends, and they're reminding the readers that, don't worry, Piranha Jones will be back in the next adventure. And that's it. The scan that I'm reading from doesn't have the ads, unfortunately. So that's it. That's my review of Luke Cage Power Man, issue number 29. And I hope to have more reviews up soon. Bye.